Hello everyone, welcome back to the Gaming CPA's channel. Today what I want to talk with you about is, now that we've seen Stadia Games and Entertainment kind of fold and close down, what I think Stadia should do from now on and moving into the future to then reopen Stadia Games and Entertainment, and how long I think that just might be. So let's break it down. Right now, what is happening, Google across the Alphabet company entirely shows a gross margin or operating margin percentage of about 20% over the last 3 years. And what does that mean? An operating margin means that if their total revenue is, let's say, $100 million, they're going to have about $80 million worth of expenses, including your G&A and your overhead and all of that, which will get you about a $20 million income that you can then basically use and reinvest into the business. Now let's apply that to Stadia. Let's say Stadia has 100K users or 100,000 users, and that's really just going off of how many Reddit followers there are. That number could be too high, that number could be too low, but let's just use that number. And let's also pretend that all of them, okay, which isn't necessarily true, but all of them subscribe to Stadia Pro. All right, we're not going to try to do any sort of game sale analytics or anything like that. We're just going to try to get Stadia numbers based on user base and if they all subscribe to Pro. That would mean that Stadia would be generating approximately $1 million a month just from those Stadia Pro and those users. So that ends up being about $12 million a year. Now, if 20% of that is total actual operating income after their expenses, all right, based on their operating margins that they have had as an Alphabet company overall, then that means that their total operating income is about $2.4 million at the end of the year. Now, let's take into consideration the average AAA development cost for a AAA game is between $60 and $80 million, according to a quick Google search. Now, let's say that if they were to try to fund this strictly from their own money made every year, it would take them about 30 years to make that kind of money to basically be able to build a AAA game, which we don't want them to take that long to basically do that. So we were expecting Google to fund and bring more money in. But Google is going to not want to just fund money in for 30 years or fund a bunch of money to have them build one game that's only used by 100K users, you know? So instead, what I think is happening is SG&E is shutting down. They're using money from Google, that Google's probably giving them as a parent company, to go get more games. So what I want to see happen is I want to see 1,000 games on Stadia within the next 2 or 3 years. And I want to see that number of users up to 1 million. Now, if they can hit the 1 million user mark, and if those 1 million users subscribe to Stadia Pro, then that is going to be $10 million a month coming into Stadia. And that is going to be $120 million a year coming into Stadia. And at that same 20% margin, that is now $24 million a year coming in, meaning that if at that point they choose to reopen Stadia Games Entertainment, they will be able to fund that $60 to $80 million budget within 3 years, which is, I think game development, depending on exactly how big of a scope. Cyberpunk took 8 years to develop, but of course the developers on that team were also helping out with The Witcher 3, and there were more games going on in that studio than just Cyberpunk development. But let's say it takes between 3 and 5 years to build a game, then that can actually be funded strictly by Stadia itself without needing more Google money coming in. Also, hopefully within the next 2 to 3 years, there will continue to be AI developments at Google. And that is something they want to, if I recall, use to help build the worlds, to help build the games. They want to use Google AI to, in fact, randomly generate worlds and create worlds. And hopefully over the next few years, that can become more efficient and be better at doing that, in which case it will be quicker to possibly develop this new Google first-party studio title. So with all that being said, I think that this was a good idea on their end with Stadia as far as shutting down their first-party studio for now. And remember, they didn't lose any work they did. The 1 year or 1.5 years that Jade Raymond and her team were there, whatever they did for the first party game is still inside of a Google server sitting there waiting to be picked back up, revamped, and continued. That is not gone. So let's not forget that. And it would be much better and easier if Google Stadia is able to basically self-fund its own SG&E without needing Google to continuously pump money into it to basically fund that process. And the last thing, I keep saying the word and I'm sorry, but the last thing is, over those 2 to 3 years before SG&E maybe comes back to life, Google has what is Google's best feature, and that is Google Analytics. Over that 2 to 3 year time frame, Stadia can analyze the user base and say 40% of our users enjoy third-person shooters like Fortnite or like certain games like that, or prefer first-person mode. 20% prefer an ESO, MMO kind of a game, and they can kind of do analytics and figure out what the best game to build for their Stadia user base at that current moment to maximize players playing their new game. And that is huge, because if they built a game which was great, but it only went to 10% of the users and they had 1 million users, that's only 100,000 people playing it, and or buying it, and let's say it cost $60, what are they making? $6 million out of that? No, they want to try to make their money back. So they want to be targeting the 80%, the 90%, ideally 100%, to try to make as much of that money back as quickly as possible. So that's another thing, that if they take a little bit more time, they get more analytics, they get a bigger user base, then they can start self-funding that Stadia Games and Entertainment and not need to ask Daddy Google for funds all the time. So I think it's very smart of them to take the funds, to take any money that was being used for Stadia Games and Entertainment, invest in third-party studios to bring games to the platform. And once they hit the 1K mark, once they hit 1 million users on the platform and players, that's when I think they can really start to actually pivot funding that is then being made. And again, I didn't cover game sale percentages at all. This is just if all those players were Stadia Pro subs, they can then use the funding to fund the Stadia Games and Entertainment internally from the subsidiary only, which I think would be great and would be fantastic, and would indeed at that point really allow them to build a game that is pivoted towards the Stadia and the cloud community. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you want to leave a thumbs up, that is awesome. If you want to hit the subscribe button as well so you get notified when I post more content like this, I would appreciate that as well. And until next time, you guys, maximize those deductions and pay less in taxes. Have a wonderful day.